It's so funny to hear yourself like that. But thank you so much for such a kind welcome. Um, I really thought today about what it is that I would speak to you about that would be helpful. So I am going to give a little bit of an overview of how we do the work we do. And I did put together a little presentation, but mostly, actually, interestingly, I'm going to be responding mostly to Claire's commentary about making sure that um, that each community is positioned to well represent themselves and to lead the work in their communities. So, as I said, I'm just going to give a framework, an update, and then talk about some of the efforts that are happening. So the first thing I just want to say to everyone is that, we talk a lot about reparations and people define that differently. Um, you know, Traditionally in the US, reparations was looked at as strictly compensatory. And of course, we're very well versed on many of the different US efforts to have reparations. There was, of course, Audley Moore in the 60s. And at throughout all of time, there have been efforts to have reparations, Sherman's Order, and what we know as 40 acres and a mule. But what a lot of people don't know is that this has also been a international effort. This is not just an isolated US effort. The call for racial justice and the call to end racial discrimination is an international effort. And there are ways in which that is being advanced in different countries. And, it's interesting. I was in the Netherlands last year, and, post George Floyd, I mean, that's all that people spoke about when I was there, about the amount of Black Lives Matter events that were held in the Netherlands. So again, I just want to situate what we do in this very global perspective. This is not just a US phenomenon. And the rights that we're fighting for are basic human rights. I mean, these are outlined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And these are basic human rights um, that were unfortunately crimes against humanity towards African Americans and Blacks. We look at it as a continuum. I know some people are very specific to slavery only, but we look at this as a continuum. And I've given you a little bit of a grid here on the right-hand side of this slide to show how post-enslavement, and we are all very aware of this, there are continued crimes against humanity, continued blunder, continue apartheid, continue acts of discrimination that have uh, honestly impacted us onto today. So, and I want to also say that within this international perspective, it's really important for you to know that throughout lots of these articles and proclamations that are given through the United Nations, there is a specific statement for the call for the right to repair. So you have the right to repair in an international framework looking at this work. There is a lot written on the right to repair. Now, that said, the United Nations is difficult for us to get things passed, and I'm not going to talk about that at length, but I again just give you this framework to say this is not just a US right, this is looked at as an international right to repair. So the work that we do, we use the International Human Rights Framework, which looks at repair in a comprehensive categorization of satisfaction, restitution, rehabilitation, compensation, and guarantees of non-repetition. And those categories are very comprehensive. Like satisfaction can be an apology, but satisfaction can also be taking down a Confederate statue. So satisfaction is kind of an umbrella. Restitution would be the giving back, let's say, of the land, like Bruce's Beach. And guarantees of non-repetition can include education and changing the ways in which we do structural, like in the ways that governments and institutions enact their structures, and changing those so that we're not repeating these harms again. So this gives a little bit of a, bullet point of what some of these might look like, so you have a sense of the comprehensiveness of this. And we're going to come back to this, but I really want you to just look at the many different ways in which repair can be enacted. And this really came out of research that just basically said, yes, money matters, but also what really matters oftentimes are other elements to communities. So it might be having psychological care or changing medical care and access to care for communities, or it might be having public apologies. So yes, compensation matters, but we're also looking at other forms of repair. So at the Redress Network, I just want to bring forward a couple of initiatives that we've been working on this year, so you kind of have a sense of where we're at right now. So we have 2 mapping initiatives that we're working on right now. One of them is a descendant-based mapping, and I want to give a shout out to Robin Imani, who's on here, for bringing this to our attention. We were kind of aware of it, but the first mapping that we did was from 2019 to 2021. And basically, the mapping kind of indicated that there were a lot of hegemonic perspectives on what was put into the media. So what you would hear about was how Georgetown University was passing something, and legacy admissions, let's say. But you wouldn't hear so much about the descendant organizations. And so, like, I give you an example here, like the Gullah Geechee loss of land and cultural heritage, and you can read easily on the news about sea pines becoming Port Royal Plantation, becoming Palmetto, becoming what we now know as Hilton Head. But what you don't know is that one of the main advocates for this change was a 70-year-old descendant who was a teenager when Sea Pines was first enacted. So how do we dig into the data to do that? And I just want to say to you, Robin, that we are working on this. This is a work in process, and it is going to take us some time. This is not an easy task to unearth some of the communities that are working on this that are maybe being silenced by media, and I know we've had that conversation on here before, and B, maybe also don't want to be known publicly because maybe they don't feel safe. Maybe there are elements that aren't supporting them. The other initiative that we are working on, and this is going to be available on our website mid-October, is that we've done a new mapping of legislation, reparation, task force commissions, and truth-telling initiatives from 1993 to 2023 over a 40-year period. But in particular, I want to show you some of the findings we've had since 2020. And we already know that we're on the uptick, but I just want to give you the legislative perspective. So we identified 147 legislative bills to advance reparations, either through the formation of task force commissions or truth-telling initiatives. 10 failed, 1 is currently in committee, 3 introduced, 5 referred, and 2 withdrawn, resulting in 116 efforts. California, Massachusetts, Minnesota, New Jersey, and North Carolina represented the states with the most legislative action. That is going to be available, and in that, there'll be a link to every bill. So if you're thinking about passing a bill, you'll be able to just click on, go to the bill, look at the wording, and potentially, draft something similar. So this is just like the overall uptick, and I just wanted to give you this graph because it's a simplistic way of looking at how we're growing. So I want to talk specifically, and this actually came out of conversations yesterday with Detroit and the Reparations Task Force. I just want to say thank you for that conversation yesterday, and Virginie Ladish, thank you for bringing us to the table. But I want to talk about the transformative processes that I how we do the work we do, and also responding to Claire, how committees, task force can make sure that you are leading this work. So many of you may be reaching out to academicians to help you with your research, and that's fine. I mean, we're trying to prove a case here. That's what happened in Evanston. Dino Robinson did the work up front with Shorefront Legacy, along with the Historic Society there. But then we came in and did an impact analysis. So there may be places and spaces where institutions are engaging with you. Traditionally, academia has been known to be a place of exclusion and also to provide prescriptive processes. So what I mean by that is they would go into a community and they would dictate the kind of research they're doing. We're here to study why are there black and white disparities in education. And in addition, oftentimes universities came with a concept of ownership of the research. We own the research. And so those are kind of imperialistic concepts, and that is changing. But I think that if you are on a commission or a task force and you are engaging with academia or other institutions, I think that you have the opportunity now to flip that narrative. And so how we do things at the Redress Network is, instead of coming in with this concept of ownership, we come in with basically this perspective that we have entered into a space where you are already engaged in self-emancipatory praxis, and that the communities that you serve are already knowledge producers. So we're just another knowledge producer. You are already knowledge producers. You know way more about your communities than any university could ever know. Let me just say that. So I remember an early conversation I had with Mickey Dean. They were looking to have somebody do the historical analysis. And Mickey has a coalition of individuals, and they had done that. And I said, Mickey, do not have them hire a fellow, have them hire you. You have already done this work. But if you do go into partnership with a university or an institution, flip the narrative. Look at how can you create a community of dialogue together. Talk about the ways in which there are commonalities that will help you define collaboration among the groups. And then basically root that work in what is community-defined needs. It's really important. What are the community-defined needs? And in that way, I think you can go forward in a more transformative relationship. So I always, shared this, but one time when we were working in Chicago, we sat down with RAGE. And if you're not from Chicago, this is an incredible organization that works on housing and providing safe spaces for community members by purchasing homes and empty lots. And we met with the leader, and she said to us, let's create our own table and invite them to us. And I think that's a completely different perspective than how institutions used to come into communities. There was no waiting to be invited. Institutions would just come into communities and do research. But it should really be in your control onto who you engage with and how you engage with them. And again, I just want to reiterate, communities are already their own knowledge producers. So when the Redress Network gets engaged with communities, and if we are honored enough to be invited to a table, we are focused solely on co-producing everything. So I'll give you an example. In Africatown, Alabama, and we worked alongside ICTJ with this in Virginia Beach, we hired a community leader. We let go completely of the reins. So funding went directly to that leader, who then engaged and connected us with all of the different community organizations within Africatown to get things done, right? So, and to also lead in how they saw repair. And so similarly, when we worked in Chicago last year, it was actually Cam Howard who brought us to that community, who opened the doors for us to meet with almost 15 different community organizations that, again, are already doing this self-emancipatory work, already looking at how do we fight against recidivism, how do we fight against housing discrimination, right? And so sitting down with those community members and understanding the needs of the community so you can better define repair. So just very briefly, this is the framework that we use when we're engaged with communities in putting together the research that is necessary to advance reparations. So the first part is doing a harms assessment. We always call it a historical analysis because you're looking at what has happened in the past. And then the second piece is the impact analysis. So this is how do we do measurable impacts? How can we do an analysis of public data sets linked to health, policing, employment, education? And then looking at reparations. So what does redress and repair look like for those communities? And throughout this process, there's really a need to have community engagement. And so I'm just going to show you this slide. Like when we are co-producing the research that's specific to the historical analysis or the harm assessment, there are different ways in which you can do that to examine the history. You can do a policy and legal analysis where you're combing through committee meetings. This is something that happened in Evanston. Dino Robinson and company did this historical analysis and found committee meetings that demonstrated they knowingly passed discriminatory zoning practices, right? You can do genealogical research to understand the history and the trajectory of the communities. You can do oral histories. Again, this was something that was done in Evanston, that we've done in Africatown, we're doing in Freemantown, Brown Grove. An environmental assessment, because so many communities are so deeply impacted by environmental harms due to the industrial and commercial zoning of Black communities. So these are the kinds of ways in which you can do these harms assessments. Now, there is a lot here. So it is important for your legislative committees or task force to really think about what kind of analysis will give you the most bang for your buck. What is it that you want? But no matter to have as an outcome, but no matter what, you really want to be thinking about how can you also do this research to connect to the community. So one of the things I will say to you is the oral history piece is huge, because not the history books are not always going to tell the histories of this discrimination. You're going to have to scour through these archives. These silenced archives is what they call it in research, silenced archives. And you're going to have to find the data. But the oral histories with the community members will help you understand those lived experiences. There are people who will be able to communicate to you what that trajectory was like for them as a result of these policies and practices that were enacted in your communities. So it's important to have that community engagement. And then the other piece is the impact analysis. And these are some of the things we've done in economic calculus. So, if reparations occurs, what will that look like as far as wealth accrual 20 years from now? How might we look at the health disparities based on, let's say there are no hospitals in the community or in the state that in Black communities in which you're looking. So what were the health disparities? What were the outcomes for health for those? Are we looking at increase in asthma? Is there an increase in cancer? In Africatown, there is I forget the percentage right now, but I mean, basically it's a cancer alley. Asthma is a huge issue. I think pretty much everybody we talk to in Africatown like has had cancer 2 or 3 times of varying forms. Um, and so these are the types of impact analysis that you can do that demonstrate that, yes, these historical harms that were occurred years ago are still sustaining harms today. And let us give you that impact analysis. Let us show you this information. I do want to note up at the top, we have co-produced on every single one of these slides because nothing goes out of the redress network without approval from the communities. So for instance, very shortly, you'll get a report that we wrote up on the Africatown work that we did last year on the Lantern Walk. They wanted to reignite this cultural heritage practice. That report was read by 4 different individuals that were leaders in the community, and gave us feedback. And yes, we mostly crafted it, but we didn't finalize it until it was approved by those individuals. So I just want to go back to here because repair is different to every community. No question, this is an economic conversation because ultimately the economic harms that have been enacted to the Black community based on centuries of oppression and initial efforts of genocide have devastated economic well-being. And we know from the work that like Justin Hansford has done at Howard and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals that really there's no other way to make up for those disparities other through some type of compensatory reparations. But within these communities, it's really important to understand perhaps maybe where some of those funds might go to. In Africatown, whatever funding we get, right now it's focused on preserving their history. They're on the bridge of extinction. They are listed as one of the 25 most endangered communities in the world by UNESCO. There remains a church, 5 churches, a cemetery, and a school. They are trying to infuse economics into their community through an Afrocentric cultural heritage effort that's comprehensive. That matters to them. Preserving their cemetery where their enslaved descendants matters to them, and it is real repair to them. So I just want to really, reiterate that community-based responsiveness to harms and the community-based responsiveness to what repair looks like. And so these are pictures from some of the work we've been doing. And it's just been an absolute honor and privilege to walk alongside. Oh, you'll see down here that in the middle, create an MOU. Create MOUs when you work with the universities and institutions. Don't hesitate to outline what it is that matters to you. Make sure you maintain ownership of your oral histories, etc. But anyway, it's been an incredible honor and privilege to walk alongside the communities that have invited us. And we have learned more from them, honestly, than I think they've learned from us. So thank you.